And it'll start recording here in just a minute when it decides to quit spinning on me. There it goes. Good afternoon and welcome to Miss Walker's Story Time. This time is geared specifically for our fourth and fifth graders, and we are going to be continuing to read Ban This Book by Alan Grant. This is the book we started, and we're going to continue to read it. So we are picking up after Amy Ann Olander and her friends have decided they're going to read all of the books that were on the banned book list given at the school board meeting. They got a hold of the list and they're trying to figure out how to get um, those books so that they can read them. And the chapter we're on is called Our Own Little Book Club. Danny Purcell bought Wait Till Helen Comes on Monday. I read it that night. It was awesome. It was scary, but not as scare not but not scary stories to tell in the dark scary. The little girl in it is the one with the funny haircut on the cover is so creepy. She hates her new stepmother and stepsister and tells them there's a ghost she met in the graveyard is going to come after them and punish them for being mean to her. When Rebecca finished Mixed Up Files, which she liked mostly because I think because Mrs. Frankenwheeler was all about talking to her lawyer, she read Danny's copy of Wait Till Helen Comes while Danny read Mixed Up Files. It was like we had our little own book club. So some of you were right that told me they thought that was what was going to happen. Rebecca caught me at my locker at the end of lunch. Amy Ann, I've looked all over for you in the cafeteria. Where were you? I got a pass to go to the library instead, I told her. Even though my favorite book still wasn't on the shelf, there were lots of other library books I wanted to read. Oh, I see how it is, Rebecca said, pretending to be angry. You love books more than your best friend? Well, I don't need you. I've got Helen. She's my only real friend, even though nobody else can see her. Just you wait till Helen comes. You'll be sorry. We cracked up laughing together. Danny loped over us and brushed his hair out of eyes. Hey, what's so funny? We could barely answer him. We were laughing so hard. Just wait till Helen comes, I said, trying to sound spooky, and you'll be sorry. Is that from that book? Never joking about it before I've read it. I've only just finished Basil E. Frankenwheeler, and I want to read scary stories next. I froze and shook my head wise. I hid it, I told him. Why? Was it really scary? I let out a little squeak. Danny pulled my locker door open wide. Where is it? I want to read it. The book wasn't in my locker. It wasn't under mattress either. I hadn't been able to keep it sleep knowing it was there. Right at this moment, it was hidden in an old gym bag at the back of my closet, buried under a pile of clothes. I grabbed my locker to close it and explain why Scary Stories wasn't there when I saw it. There was a note in my mailbox locker. She's never gotten a note in her mailbox locker before. Next chapter, a notable note. I didn't notice right off because when I had gotten used to not getting any notes, but something white was folded, definitely sticking out of my locker mailbox. I must have stood and stared at it for a long time because Rebecca had to wave her hand in front of my face to get my attention. Hey, Earth to Amy Ann, you look like you just saw Helen's ghost. I pointed to the note. Did you send me a note? Rebecca shook her head. Never leave a paper trail, she reminded me. I had then a horrible thought struck her and she turned to Danny. You didn't send her a note, did you? Danny took a step back. Hey, whoa, send a note to a girl? No way. Rebecca relaxed. If Danny had written me the note, I didn't know which one she would have killed first. Well, who else would send me a note? I asked. Well, I know a good way to find out, Danny said. You could, read it and find out. I pulled the note out and unfolded it. It was a piece of notebook paper torn out of a spiral notebook with pink, loopy handwriting on it. AA, Danny said you have the Egypt game. Can I read it? Jana. It's from Jana Park, I said. She wants to borrow the Egypt game. Oh, yeah. I told her you had a copy, Danny said. My heart skipped a beat. Jana Park had written me a note. Jana Park had written a note and called me AA. No one had ever called me AA before. I liked it. Jana was one of the girls who was always following Danny around, much like Rebecca. Jana probably liked Danny's hair as much as he did. I was surprised he'd even mentioned the Egypt game to her, since he'd only heard me and Rebecca talking about it on the bus. But I was excited that someone else wanted to read it. Good books shouldn't be hidden away. They should be read by as many people as possible. I wrote a note back to Jana and stuck it in her locker before class. Jana, sure, I'll bring it tomorrow. AA. Jana came to my locker the next day after lunch, and I passed her the Egypt game in secret, like we were in a spy movie. Thanks, she said. Then she stood there and didn't leave. You're welcome, I said. She didn't leave. What is it? I asked her. Jana looked around and then said quietly, Do you have any of the other books? If I wanted to read them? Oh, yeah. I've got From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankenweiner, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, but it is really, really scary. And Danny's got Wait Till Helen Comes. But he probably told you that. Oh, is that all? She looked in my locker for the other books, but she was disappointed. I could tell, and there's suddenly only one thing I wanted in the world to do but to please her, because she had written me a note and called me AA. Those are the only ones I have now, she told her. But if there's another one you want to read, I can probably get it. I'm saving up. Is it, Are You God? Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. She shook her head, and I was felt a little relieved. I was a little afraid of that one. Is it Harriet the Spy? She shook her head. Goosebumps? Judy B. Jones? No. Matilda? No. What else could it be? It couldn't be Campton Underpants. That was the only one left. Oh, she wanted to read that one. Jana popped up beside her, and Jana and I jumped. Okay, bye, Jana. She hurried away. What was that about? Rebecca asked. Jana borrowed the Egypt game for me, but I think she wants to read a different one of the banned books. Which one? I whispered. That sex book. It's perfectly normal. I grabbed my brain and held it close to my mouth, but I can't buy that one. That one is on the list, Rebecca said. You don't have to buy it. I've got it. My eyes went wide. She had a copy at your house? I asked. Yeah. She acted like it was no big deal. My mom gave it to me. I think that way I couldn't sue her one day for telling me everything I needed to know. Have you read it? I whispered. Rebecca, honestly, some parts. I wanted to ask her which parts, but and what it said, but I was too embarrassed and jumped as Mr. Vaughn called us into class down the hall. Will you bring it? I asked her. Rebecca stopped at the door. Okay, she said with a secret smile, and she threw open the door and ran inside. With Rebecca's book, Danny's book, and my books, we had almost half the books Mrs. Spencer banned from the library sitting in my locker tomorrow, where anybody could read them, not just me. Which was when I got an even bigger idea than the one I had had before. Next chapter, the bigger idea. I cleared a shelf of my locker and put up my copies of Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankenwheeler, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, Shiver, Danny's copy of Wait Till Helen's Come, and Rebecca's copy of It's Perfectly Normal, which I had peeked at. Jana let me have a copy of an old Judy B. Jones book she had at home. Danny got his friend Parker to donate his whole collection of the Goosebump books. When Jana gave me back the Egypt game, I had a total of 14 books. 14 books banned by Mrs. Spencer and his friends, free to borrow for any student who wanted to read them. And that's how the banned books locker library began. I still had 4 to go to have all the banned books. Well, more than that, if you counted all the other Goosebumps and the Judy B. Jones and the Captain Underpants books. But all I really needed was Harriet the Spy, Matilda, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, and the Captain Underpants book. Well, I'd at least have one of everything on Mrs. Spencer's list. But Mrs. Spencer wasn't done. When I went to the school library after school to hide in my usual spot until the late bus came, Mrs. Spencer was there. Today she was wearing one of those pink track suits that nobody really goes running in. She had another list of books. More, Mrs. Jones said. Her face was the same color as her orange and white polka dot dress. Honestly, Mrs. Spencer, have you read these books? Have you read any of them? I pretended to be interested in the magazine rack near the front desk so I could listen. I don't need to read them, Miss Spencer said. Once I took my concerns to the school board, a number of other parents brought books to my attention. I looked up the reviews of the books online and decided these books weren't appropriate for a elementary school library. You decided, Mrs. Jones said. I didn't realize you'd had a library and science information degree. Mrs. Spencer stood straighter. It added an inch to her height, but not enough to come up to Mrs. Jones' level. I don't need a fancy library degree to know what's right and what's wrong for children. I see. Let me get you some of those requests for reconsideration forms. That won't necessary. I've already spoken to members of the school board about these books, and they agree they have no place in Shelbourne Elementary. Well, that may be, but until I hear from the school boards, these books will stay on the shelf. And she handed the list back to Mrs. Spencer. I see, Mrs. Spencer said, and she looked at the list for a moment and then said, smiled sweetly, before I go, I'll pick out some books for Trey. Anything I can help with? No, thanks. I have a list. I knew what Mrs. Spencer was doing. So did Mrs. Jones. Mrs. Spencer was going to check out the books on her list so no one else could check them out until the school board told Mrs. Jones to take them off the shelf. There was nothing Mrs. Jones could do about it. For the next 15 minutes, Mrs. Spencer went through the shelves and collected every book on her list. I couldn't watch, but I also couldn't hide in my favorite spot. Trey was sitting in it, drawing in his notebook. I pulled up short. I was shocked as I had been when Mrs. Frankenwheeler's was gone missing. I felt the heat rise in my face. Trey's mom had banned my favorite book from the library, and now Trey was sitting in my favorite library seat. I still hadn't forgiven him for what he did to me in third grade. My fitch clasped the hem of my skirt, and I slipped down a row of books before he could look up and see me. Mrs. Spencer finally came to the counter with an armful of books, and Jones had no choice but to check them out to her in Trey's name. Trey, it's time to go, Mrs. Spencer said. He collected his stuff and left my spot. On the way out, he glanced and saw me watching him from the big potted plant. I stuck my tongue out at him, and he just chuckled. That odious woman, Mrs. Jones said when they were gone. This all started when she didn't like that the Captain Underpants Trey checked out. She gave me an exasperated sigh that seemed to give her an idea. She smiled to herself and went to the office in the back at one of the windows and got on a computer. While Mrs. Jones wasn't looking, I snatched the list from Mrs. Spencer left on the counter and dashed out of the library. I needed it. Every time Mrs. Spencer took a book from the school library, I was going to add a book to my secret locker library. Next chapter, Violent Criminals. Standing next to my locker the next few days later was a third grader wearing a tan trench coat with lapels turned up. He wore sunglasses, brown hair that looked like a comb that hadn't touched the kid's head in years. Psst, psst, he said. Are you Amy Ann Olander? Yeah, who are you? Weeby. Nicole Weeby. He leaned closer. The red dog barks at midnight. What? He frowned. It's code, a spy code. Well, it's not very good code if only one of us knows it. I thought, didn't he know? But I didn't say it. The boy looked. I'm looking for a book, a secret book, a spy book. Do you mean Harriet the Spy? Shh, he said and glanced around as if there were spies everywhere. It's checked out, I told him. I opened the BBLL, the banned books locker library, to show him. There were only 6 books left on the shelf. Everything else had been checked out, even after I'd added another 12 books from Mrs. Spencer's new list, mostly with Danny's help. He knew all kinds of people who had copies at their house. Can you put me on a list? He said. I pulled out a clipboard where could reserve a book and add his name. Whenever somebody turned a book in, I went through the list and found the next person who wanted it and left them a note in their locker in the mailbox saying it's ready for pickup. My own locker mailbox had 3 notes in it, all from 3 different people in my class, asking for one of the books to read. My locker mailbox was getting a lot more use lately. You You should have a list, he said, of all the books you have so the people know what they can check out. And do what? Hang it on the outside of my locker with a sign that says, Here are all the books you're not supposed to read, but I have hidden in my locker, I wanted to say. Instead, I said, I'll think about it. Nicole pulled a pen out of his pocket and talked into it like a microphone. Abort mission, repeat. Abort mission. Alert Ukraine intelligence, the package is not in the locker. Repeat, not in the locker. I closed my locker and saw someone watching me from behind another locker down the hall. It was Trey. There. Really were spies, everyone. Hey, I got a new one, Danny said, making me jump. Nicole was gone, and Danny stood in his place. With one hand, he combed his helmet hair into the exact place he wanted. And with another one, he slid me a beat up old copy of My Brother Sam is Dead. I squeaked and stuck the book under my shirt and glanced down the hall. Trey was gone. He had seen Danny give me the book. If he did, the first thing he would do was run tell his mom. I popped one of the beads on my mouth in my mouth and sucked on it. Sorry, I thought you'd be excited. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I told him. I pulled the book out and quickly tucked it into my locker. It was one of the books off of Mrs. Spencer's new list that I didn't have. JV's older brother had a copy of it. He thinks he might have bridged to Terabithia around somewhere too. He's going to look this weekend. I'll let you know. I didn't understand why Danny was so into finding all the books on the list. He really wasn't interested in the reading them like I was. I thanked him anyway, put the book on my locker, and we had to get to class. Have you read any of the Wayside School books? I asked him. I think you'd like them. They're really funny. Danny flicked his hair into place. Cool. I didn't know you had those. I'll pick one up after school. And we went to Mr. Irvan's class, and he walked me to my desk. Rebecca was already sitting in the desk behind me. Hey, we've got so many books now. You need a list, Danny whispered, to let everybody know what's in the BBLL. I know. Nicole said the same thing. Right. What's she supposed to do? Tape it to her front of her locker when she gets caught? It's a lawsuit time. Felt quicksand opening up beneath me. Lawsuit time? Sure. From all the parents whose children you've corrupted. Why do you think they've banned all those books to begin with? Because parents think we're not going to use our brains. They're going to rot them and then turn us into violent criminals. Danny ran his fingers through his hair. I don't know about you guys, but ever since I read Wait Till Helen Comes, I keep thinking about worshiping Satan. He's really got some really good ideas. Don't joke. This is serious, I said. Is this serious, Rebecca? Oh, come on, Danny said. Nobody's going to sue you, suspend you. Maybe, but not sue you. Definitely suspend, Rebecca agreed. Quicksand turned into water, and I sank to the bottom, desk and all. The next chapter, juvenile delinquents. Although math, although math, I sucked on my braids and imagined the awful things that would happen if I got caught with those books in my locker. Every parent at Shelbourne Elementary would line up to sue me. My dad would lose his bricklaying business. My mom would lose her job. We'd have to sell our house and move to a different city. My sisters would have to be sold to medical companies. Well, that wouldn't be all bad. I was overreacting and I knew it. What was I doing wasn't illegal. The school board just said Mrs. Jones couldn't loan out those books. They didn't say I couldn't. I still wanted to loan out the books, but I didn't want to get caught. So, how was I going to let people know what books I had to check out? What if I didn't have a way of telling other kids what I had? They wouldn't know to ask for them, and nobody would read them. And then it would all be for nothing. And then I had it. Why not tape the list of books I had on my locker? I didn't have to call it that. During language arts, I used one of the computers to type up the list. I taped it to my locker after school. On the top shelf, labeled big capital letters, it said banned books at Shelbourne Elementary. Underneath it, it had every one of the books Mrs. Spencer and the other parents had taken off the shelf, and a little dot of green magic marker next to all the books I had in the BBLL. Once everybody knew how to read it, I could add new green dot to any book that got added. Presto. Looking at the list again, I realized there was a lot of books I needed to add, and Danny was running out of people to ask. What I needed was money to buy books. Bake sale, Rebecca said. Of course, I said, a bake sale. Every time we wanted to raise money to help build a well in Africa or support the Red Cross after a hurricane, we had a bake sale. All I had to do was tell my dad we were having another bake sale at school, and he picked up a brownie mix at the store without even asking what it was for. Same with Rebecca's mom. Rebecca and I set up our plastic wrapped brownies and chocolate chip cookies in a basket on the table in the cafeteria and started raking in the moolah. The first day we made $7.50. I was counting out quarters again when Rebecca nudged me. What? She nudged me again harder. What? I looked up and saw Principal Bandana coming right at us. Her name really wasn't Principal Banana, of course. It was Banzini, but none of the kindergartners could pronounce it right, so she let them call her Principal Banana. The fourth graders, we were supposed to call her Principal Banzawiki, though. Principal Banzawiki reminded me of the police detective from those TV mysteries. She wore gray suits with black leather shoes, and she always had a walkie talkie on her belt and her school ID and a badge holder pinned to her jacket like a badge. I expected her to yell, "Freeze, punk, you're under arrest," every time I saw her. Instead, she looked over our section of desserts and said, "Looks good, ladies. What's the cause?" "What?" I said. "What are you raising money for?" Principal Banzizi asked. Her walkie talkie squashed and she turned down the volume without looking at it. I pulled a braid around and chewed on it. Um, we couldn't tell her what the bake sale was really for. How was I going to make something up? What had our last bake sale been for? I couldn't remember. With Detective Banzizi staring at me, I couldn't think of anything. "We're raising money for books," I said. "Books?" she said. I, Rebecca gawked at me. "Books for prisoners," I said, "for them to read in prison." Rebecca closed her eyes. I think she might have been praying. "Books for prisoners," Principal Benzoizi said. "Kid prisoners, kids our age who are in jail." Under the table, Rebecca started hitting my leg with her fist. "Oh, you mean juvenile delinquents," Principal Benzizi said. "Yes, juvenile delinquents. We're raising money to buy books for juvenile delinquents." That sounded good. "Well, that's very noble of you," she said. "I'll take 2 cookies and hand it over a dollar." I had to kick Rebecca to get her to open the eyes and take the money. Rebecca turned on me the second Principal Banzawiki was gone. "Books for prisoners to read in jail," she said. "Well, what was I supposed to say?" "We're raising money for the homeless, or an animal shelter, or a food bank." "Well, those were all great ideas. Uh, where were they all when I was asking?" She was asking. "Well, I thought you could think of something else besides. You know what we're actually raising money for," Rebecca said. "Oh, yeah. Well, you just wait till Helen comes. Then you'll be sorry for picking on me." Rebecca and I busted out laughing. "I'm sorry. All right. Every time I see Principal Banana, I think of the police and it makes me nervous." "Well, at least you didn't lie to her. We are raising money to buy books for juvenile delinquents. They're just us." And we will stop right there. Our next chapter is called When Helen Comes, and we will pick up this story next week.